I need you to understand something before the first story begins. The 10 people you are about to hear from are not people who scare easily. They are a librarian, a meteorologist, a funeral director, a court transcriptionist, a wildlife biologist, a sleep researcher, a notary, a postal inspector, a museum conservator, a school bus driver. People whose entire professional lives were built on one thing: accuracy. On knowing what was in their systems, what was in their records, what was exactly where it was supposed to be. And one day, in the middle of completely ordinary work, in the middle of systems they had maintained for years, they found something operating inside those systems that their systems had no record of putting there. Something that knew things it should not have known. Something that had been there, working quietly and correctly for longer than any of them knew to look. 10 stories, 10 professionals, 10 moments where the system was right and the world behind it was wrong. From True Terror Files Official, we begin. Welcome back to True Terror Files Official, the channel that tells you everything. Every night, because the people in these stories deserve to have someone say out loud what they experienced, without softening it and without apology. Tonight we have a theme, and the theme is this: systems. The records and the databases and the logbooks and the files and the catalogs that professional people maintain to keep track of what is in the world and where it is and what it is doing. The things we have built to tell us, reliably and verifiably, what is real. Tonight's 10 people are all professionals who trust their systems the way you trust a light switch, with the deep and unexamined confidence of someone who has pressed it 10,000 times and had it work every single time, and then one day the switch worked, but the room was wrong. A librarian who discovered that her library was receiving returns from something that had never checked the books out, and that the notes inside them were accurate predictions of events that had not yet happened. A meteorologist who found that a weather station his agency decommissioned 12 years ago was still filing forecasts, accurate ones, 7 days ahead. A funeral director who found handwritten farewell notes tucked inside the clothing of people who had died without warning, dressed as specific people and written as though there had been time to say goodbye. A court transcriptionist whose official record contained testimony before the witness had opened their mouth. A wildlife biologist whose animal tracking data showed every tagged species in a 300-mile radius moving toward a single GPS coordinate that contained nothing. A sleep researcher running a standard overnight study whose 3 unrelated subjects were having the exact same dream, word for word, and the dream described things that had not happened yet. These are not ghost stories in the way you have been taught to expect ghost stories. These are something more specific and more unsettling. They are the records of something operating inside our systems, correctly, persistently, with apparent purpose, and leaving just enough evidence to be found by the person careful enough to look. Stay close. This is True Terror Files Official, and tonight we tell you everything. Margot Ellery had been a public librarian for 22 years, the last 15, as head of circulation at the Caldwell branch of the regional public library system, a mid-sized urban branch, serving a population of approximately 40,000 residents, holding just over 80,000 physical items, and processing between 300 and 500 circulation transactions on a busy weekday. And Margot understood this institution with the unhurried and intimate familiarity of someone who had spent a career inside it, who knew the collection not as a catalog, but as a felt geography, who understood the rhythms of the patrons and the staff, and the building's mechanical temperament, and the specific way Tuesday mornings differed from Thursday afternoons in the quality of who came through the door and what they needed. And she had built over 22 years of professional practice grounded in the conviction that a library was not a repository but a relationship between a community and its accumulated knowledge. And she took this seriously in the daily and unglamorous way that people take seriously the things they have chosen to give their working lives to. The first anomalous return appeared on a Monday morning in early March, deposited overnight in the exterior drop box, processed by her assistant Claudia at the start of the day shift. A hardcover contemporary novel the branch held 3 copies of in its active collection, which scanned through the returns workflow in the standard way before Claudia noticed that the item's circulation history showed its last checkout as 14 months prior, returned on schedule, after which it had been reshelved and had not moved since, meaning the copy in the return bin had not come from a patron's home. Yes, because no patron had borrowed it, and a book sitting on a shelf in a locked building does not travel to the exterior drop box without assistance.
How?
Margot pulled the item to examine it before sending it to the returns cart and found the narrow white margin at the bottom of the final page. A handwritten note in a small and deliberate hand using a fine-line black pen. A man named Gerald will come in Wednesday asking for the 1991 Harwick Road Planning Survey. It is misfiled in the County Easement Register, Box 14, not the Development Permit Index. He has been looking for 3 months and is close to giving up. Help him find it. Margot's first and entirely reasonable assumption was that the note was a leftover annotation from the books. 14-month ago checkout, the kind of patron margin note that occasionally survived a condition review, and she flagged the item for deaccession on annotation grounds and moved on with the day. On Wednesday, a retired civil engineer named Gerald Marsh arrived at the reference desk asking about a planning survey from 1991 for a specific road in the county's historic development area, and said he had been searching the branch's local document archive for 12 weeks across 3 separate visits and had not been able to locate it. And Margot went to the county easement register storage, not the development permit index where a previous staff member had pointed him, and found the survey in box 14 cross-filed under a geographic rather than an administrative designation. A straightforward misfiling that had survived 3 targeted searches, because all 3 searches had started from the wrong record. And Gerald looked at the document for a long time before he looked at Margot and asked how she had known where to look. And she said she had encountered a cross-reference recently that pointed her there, which was accurate in the specific and insufficient way of a true answer that omits the most important detail. The second anomalous return arrived the following Monday. A large format reference atlas the system showed is currently shelved in the geography section, not in any active checkout, deposited overnight in the Dropbox with a margin note. The woman who calls Thursday morning about the Thompson estate donation. The boxers have been in the off-site storage unit since the 2019 facility move. They were never formally logged into the collection. Unit C, Shelf Row 4. She has the right to them and has been told twice that they don't exist. They do. On Thursday, a woman called about materials her late grandmother had donated to the branch's local history collection. Materials she had been informed twice in writing did not appear in the collection's inventory. And Margot drove to the off-site storage facility on her lunch break and found 4 archive boxes in Unit C, Shelf Row 4, labeled with the Thompson surname and the donation date, never formally processed into the catalog. Present and intact. And the woman received her grandmother's materials on Friday and sent a handwritten note to the branch that, Margot kept in her desk and has looked at more than once since. By July, Margot had logged 24 anomalous returns, all following the identical pattern, a circulating item the system showed as currently shelved, deposited Monday overnight, containing a margin note describing a patron need or staff situation that would materialize later that week, and the notes had been accurate in all. 24 instances, predicting specific patron requests, identifying specific misfiled materials, anticipating 2 equipment failures before they occurred, warning on one occasion that a patron scheduled for Tuesday afternoon would arrive in a state of distress, that went beyond the stated research request, and that Margot specifically should be the one to address it because the patron knew her voice and trusted it. And on that Tuesday, the patron arrived, and the prediction was correct in every particular. She reviewed the branch's overnight security footage for each of the 24 Monday nights and found, in every case, the same anomaly in the camera recording covering the interior book drop intake area, a window of between 4 and 8 minutes, occurring between 2 and 4 a.m., during which the footage showed the building's normal overnight appearance, but with a quality shift in the recorded image that she could only describe as a change. In how the light inside the frame was arranged, not a technical artifact, not an electrical fluctuation. Nothing her video professional friend could attribute to a camera malfunction, during which the intake tray was empty at the windows. Start and contained the returned item at its close, with no hand, no person. No entry, no event visible in between, simply the book present. In the way that certain things are simply present without the footage showing them arriving, Margot has continued following the notes for 11 months, and every note has been correct, and every patron need the notes identified has been met, and the branch's circulation and patron satisfaction records for those 11 months are, without any other explanation she can construct, the strongest in her 15 years as head of circulation. And she has not reported the anomalous returns to the library systems. Administration, because she does not have language for an official report that does not require her to say something she is not prepared to commit to in a document. And she processes the Monday morning Dropbox herself now before Claudia arrives, because she wants to be the first person to read what has been left there. And she has come to understand those early Monday minutes as the most important information her professional life currently gives her, which is not a conclusion she expected to reach about the contents of an overnight book return bin, which is the honest truth. And 22 years in an institution devoted to honest truth has given her the specific and sufficient courage to live with it. Edmund Pryce had been a meteorologist with the National Weather Service for 17 years. The last 9 assigned to the Regional Forecasting Office covering a mountainous section of the Pacific Northwest, a complex forecast area where the interaction of maritime air masses with the coastal range and the Cascades produced the kind of atmospheric behavior that required, from the forecasters who managed it, both a strong technical foundation in mesoscale meteorology and the specific and developed intuition that only comes from watching the same complicated sky for long enough to know its particular moods, and Edmund had both. Had spent 9 years in that specific atmosphere and had developed a professional relationship with it that he would have described in a candid moment as a kind of knowing, not certainty, because meteorology did not deal in certainty, but the probability-weighted pattern recognition of a person who had watched this particular convergence zone behave under enough different forcing conditions to have a feel for what it was going to do next that ran ahead of the models in useful ways. The anomaly surfaced during a routine data quality review, a monthly audit of the automated surface observing stations in his forecast area, checking each station's transmission record for gaps, calibration drift, or data format errors, and it appeared in the record of Station 7 Kilo, in a surface weather observation installation at approximately 4,200 feet, elevation on a ridge in the northern section of his area. A station that Edmund knew well from his first years at the office, and which had been formally decommissioned 12 years prior when the agency consolidated. Its surface network and the station's ridge location was determined to be adequately covered by two surrounding stations at lower elevations. The decommissioning completed properly with a shutdown of the transmission equipment and a removal of the instruments. The station's data feed officially closed in the National Observation Network, and its site designation retired. Station 7 Kilo appeared in the monthly quality audit as active, its data feed present in the Automated Surface Observation Network, station identifier, current and returning data in the standard Meter format. And when Edmund opened the feed and looked at its contents, he found observation records transmitted at the standard hourly interval for the preceding 31 days temperature, dew point, wind speed and direction, visibility, present weather, altimeter setting, all in the correct format, all within physically plausible ranges for the station's elevation and location. All internally consistent with the meteorological conditions Edmund's own analysis records showed for the region during that same 31-day period. And all time stamped not with the current hour of each transmission but 7 days ahead, meaning the record he was looking at on the 12th of the month contained observations for the 19th, and the record for the 13th contained observations for the 20th. The station transmitting what appeared to be surface weather data for a 0.7 days in its own future with the format precision and the plausible physical content of a functioning automated instrument. He ran the station's data against his archived forecast verification records for the past month, the daily comparison of what the models predicted against what actually occurred at observation sites across his area, and found that the data transmitted by Station 7 Kilo for any given date corresponded, with high accuracy and in specific detail, to what his verification records showed actually occurred at that location 7 days after the transmission, meaning the station had been sending him the actual weather accurately 1 week before it happened, for at least the 31 days his audit window covered. He contacted the agency's Network Operations Center, which confirmed that Station 7 Kilo's data feed had been closed at decommissioning 12 years prior, and showed no record of reactivation, and that the data appearing in the current network record under that station's identifier could not be traced to any transmitting equipment the agency had at that location or any adjacent location. And the network operations engineer who handled his inquiry called back 40 minutes after their initial conversation to say that when they had attempted to administratively close the feed in the current system, the closure command returned an error indicating that the data source was not a recognized network endpoint and therefore could not be closed through standard administrative protocols. Which was a response the engineer said he had not previously encountered in 14 years of network operations work. Edmund continued receiving the station's data for 4 additional months while the agency's technical investigation proceeded without resolution. And in those 4 months he used the 7-day head observations to validate and in several instances correct his operational forecasts for the northern section of his area, not officially, not in any documentation that named Station 7 Kilo as a data source. Because he had no framework for citing a decommissioned ghost station transmitting future weather, as an official forecast input, but in the specific and practical way of a forecaster who has access to accurate information and whose professional obligation is to produce the most accurate forecast possible, and his verification scores for those 4 months were the highest of his 9-year tenure at the office. The feed stopped transmitting on a Thursday morning in the 5th month without warning or observable cause, and the Network Operations Center confirmed its disappearance from the system simultaneously with Edmund's. Discovery of its absence and the technical investigation concluded in writing that the origin of the data transmissions was undetermined and that no physical equipment had been found at the Station 7 Kilo site during a field inspection conducted in the 3rd month of the investigation, which had found only the original decommissioned equipment pad, weathered and overgrown, with no evidence of recent human activity and no transmitting equipment of any kind. And Edmund filed the investigation closure report in his office's records and returned to his daily forecast work. And he has thought about Station 7 Kilo every time he has looked at a model output for the northern section of his area in the 2 years since it went silent. And what he thinks about is not the impossibility of the transmissions, but the specific and professional grief of a forecaster who had for 4 months access to accurate 7-day-ahead surface data for his most complex terrain, and who now works again without it, and who understands, in a way he cannot put in a verification report, that the difference between those 4 months and every other month of his career is the difference between forecasting and knowing. Vivienne Calder had been a licensed funeral director for 19 years. The owner and sole practitioner of a family-operated funeral home in a small city in the Upper South, and she understood her profession with the specific and serious depth of someone who had chosen it not despite its proximity to death, but because of it, because she believed, and had believed since early in her adult life, that the care of the dead was one of the most important and most under-dignified forms of human service. That the people who came to her were in the most acute and disorienting grief most of them would ever experience. And that what happened in the hours and days between a person's death and their burial was not administrative, but pastoral. It's not logistical, but deeply and essentially human. And she brought to this work a combination of technical precision and genuine warmth that her families consistently described as the specific quality that had made an unbearable period bearable. And she took that description as the professional standard she was trying to meet and had been trying to meet for 19 years. The first note appeared in November with a decedent she will identify only by first name, a 44-year-old man named Raymond, who had died suddenly of a cardiac event with no prior history and no warning, found by his wife at home on a Tuesday morning, brought to Vivienne's care that same afternoon. And when Vivienne prepared him, she found tucked inside the inner breast pocket of the shirt he was wearing when he arrived, the shirt he had put on that morning without any knowledge that he would not remove it himself, a folded piece of paper. And she opened it because anything found on a decedent was documented as part of the intake record, and it was a handwritten note. 2 paragraphs in what she later confirmed was Raymond's own handwriting, addressed to his wife by her first name, and the note said things that a man says to a woman he has loved for 22 years when he has been given time to compose himself and think about what he most needs her to know, which was the specific and unbearable thing about it, because Raymond had not been given that time. He had left for the kitchen that Tuesday morning and had not come back, and the note was not a generic expression of love, but a specific one. Addressing particular things between them, particular fears his wife had that Raymond had apparently understood precisely. Particular instructions for particular situations his wife would face. And one paragraph that his wife said, when Vivienne called her with careful and deliberate words, contained information about a financial matter that Raymond was the only person alive who had known. Vivienne documented the note in the intake record, gave the original to Raymond's wife, and carried the fact of it through the following weeks with the careful and private weight of something she had no professional category for, an anomaly. A thing outside the normal structure of her work that she had no framework to report and no colleague to consult about, because there was no professional literature she had encountered. In 19 years of practice, that addressed what to do when a man who died without warning is found carrying a farewell letter written in his own hand. The second note appeared 4 months later, the 61-year-old woman named Dorothy, a retired schoolteacher who had died of a sudden stroke with no preceding symptoms. And the note was in Dorothy's handwriting in the pocket of her cardigan, 2 pages, addressed to her adult daughter, containing a specific apology for a specific rupture in their relationship that the daughter confirmed to Vivienne had never been spoken of between them, but which Dorothy had apparently been carrying for 11 years and had now, in some way that the living Dorothy had not found a way to do. Addressed in full, and when Vivienne called the daughter and read her the note's opening line, the daughter said nothing for a long time, and then said, "How did she have time to write this?" And Vivienne said she did not know. By the end of the following year, she had found 11 notes, all in the handwriting of the decedent, all tucked in a pocket or fold of the clothing they were wearing at the time of death. All deaths that had been sudden and without any warning period that would have allowed time to write. All notes addressed to a specific named individual who confirmed both that the handwriting was authentic and that the content of the note contained information or acknowledgments or expressions that no other living person could have. Provided 11 notes and 11 sudden deaths across 14 months. And Vivienne had documented each one in a private record she maintained separate from her intake files. And she had consulted a handwriting analyst about the third note on the grounds of a professional concern she declined to specify. And the analyst confirmed the handwriting was consistent with samples of the decedent's writing provided by the family. No evidence of imitation or forgery. Consistent pen pressure and hand characteristic with the individual's known writing style, and had asked what her concern was, and Vivienne had said she was simply conducting due diligence. And the analyst had looked at her for a moment and said, "These people wrote their own notes, didn't they?" And Vivienne had not answered, and she has not answered that question to anyone since. And she continues her work with the same precision and warmth that her families have always described. She finds the notes now, still finding them, 21 total as of this year. And she gives them to the families with the care and the deliberateness of someone delivering something that was meant to be delivered. Because that, she has concluded, is exactly what she is doing. And the question she lives with is not how the notes were written, but why it is her hands. Specifically, that were chosen to make the delivery, and whether there is something in 19 years of caring precisely for the dead that made her. In some accounting she does not have access to, the right person to carry what the dead most needed to say. Theron Bassi had been a certified court transcriptionist for 14 years. The last 8 working as a contract reporter in the civil and family divisions of a county circuit court producing the official verbatim record of court proceedings, a function he understood with the specific and unglamorous professionalism of someone who had spent a career making himself functionally invisible in a room, present without being present in the social sense. A witness to hundreds of hours of testimony across hundreds of cases without retaining personal investment in any of them. Because the function of the official record was not to evaluate what was said, but to capture it exactly. And the integrity of the transcript depended on the reporter maintaining the strict neutrality of a recording instrument present, accurate, transparent, and otherwise absent. The anomaly appeared during a routine administrative matter, a simple contract dispute in a small civil case. Two parties represented by counsel, a single witness being examined on direct. The proceedings entirely unremarkable in character, and in no way the kind of high-stakes litigation that would have introduced any motivation for irregularity in the record, and Theron was producing the real-time transcript on his stenotype system in the standard way when he noticed that a sequence of words had appeared in his transcript that he had not yet heard the witness speak. A complete sentence appearing in the record, I discussed the arrangement with my partner in April of 2019, and we agreed the terms were satisfactory to both parties, which was accurate testimony, which the witness did in fact deliver, but which appeared in Theron's transcript feed approximately 4 to 6 seconds before the witness opened his mouth to say it. He reviewed the real-time display and confirmed the sequence. The words were present in the record. The witness's mouth was closed. And then the witness spoke the sentence, and the words were in the record twice. Once pre-existing the speech, and once as the result of his stenotype input, and he made a correction in the record to eliminate the duplication and continued the session with the specific and controlled attentiveness of a professional who has encountered an anomaly mid-proceeding and has concluded the correct action is to continue without disrupting the court. And he reviewed his equipment after the session and found no malfunction, no software error, no history of predictive text input that could explain a real-time stenotype system displaying output that had not yet been entered. The second occurrence was 3 days later, in a different case, same courtroom. A witness in a custody hearing being examined on cross, and the words appeared ahead of the speech by a margin. Theron estimated at 5 seconds a full sentence of testimony about a specific date and a specific conversation. Appearing in the record before the witness spoke it and matching the spoken version word for word, and Theron noted the time and the position in the re-enter and continued, and after the session reviewed the transcript against his stenotype input log and confirmed that the pre-existing sentence had no input origin in his log. It appeared in the display without corresponding keystrokes in a system that was, by design, physically incapable of producing output without corresponding input. By the end of the 4th month, he had documented 31 instances across 11 separate cases, all following the same pattern, testimony appearing in the official record 4 to 7 seconds before it was spoken. Always accurate, always word-for-word matching the subsequent spoken testimony. And he had engaged a forensic technology analyst to examine his equipment, and the analyst found no evidence of predictive software. No network connection that could have sourced external input, no hardware modification, and no explanation for output without input in a closed stenotype system. And the analyst's written assessment said, no identified mechanism for the observed pre-speech transcript entries. Equipment functioning within normal operational parameters. Anomaly source, undetermined. Theron's professional obligation was to the accuracy of the official court record. And the 31 instances produced accurate records, The pre-existing entries matched the spoken testimony in every case, and the final transcripts, after his post-session corrections, were clean and fully accurate, and no judge or attorney had identified any irregularity in any of the 31 case transcripts. And he wrestled throughout those 4 months with the specific and particular ethics of a situation in which something was helping him produce a more accurate official record through a mechanism he could not explain and could not stop. And what he arrived at after 4 months of living with it was this: the official record is accurate. The proceedings were not disrupted. Whatever was appearing in his transcript ahead of the testimony was not inventing words but delivering them, which meant it knew them before the witness spoke them, which meant it was present in the room in a way his equipment could detect, but his eyes and ears could not. And Theron has thought about this in every proceeding he has worked in the 3 years since the pre-speech entries stopped, as suddenly as they began. On a Tuesday morning, after a 4-month run without a single skipped session, and what he thinks about is not the technology and not the ethics, but the character of the assistants, the patience and precision of something that sat in a county circuit courtroom across 11 cases over 4 months and ensured that the official record said exactly what it should say, which is a goal Theron has spent 14 years of his career pursuing, and which he and whatever was in that courtroom apparently shared. Celeste Nakamura had been a field wildlife biologist for 11 years. The last 6, as the lead researcher on a long-term carnivore and ungulate monitoring study covering a remote wilderness section of the Northern Rockies, a research area of approximately 1,200 square miles of roadless forest, alpine meadow, and river drainage managed as part of a federal wilderness designation, in which Celeste and her small team tracked the movements of a tagged population of wolves, mountain lions, black bears, elk, and mule deer using GPS collar data transmitted to a satellite network at 6-hour intervals, building a movement database that was, by the 6th year of the study, one of the most comprehensive continuous wildlife tracking records for a single wilderness area in the region. And Celeste understood this data with the specific and intimate familiarity of someone who had spent 6 years watching individual animals move through a landscape she knew on foot. Who could read a movement track the way a person reads a face? Who knew the travel corridors and the seasonal patterns and the individual behavioral signatures of each collared animal with enough specificity to notice when something in the data was wrong before the statistical analysis confirmed it? The anomaly appeared in the movement data on a Thursday morning in late October, surfacing in the routine data visualization she ran each morning. At the field station, a map display showing the previous 24 hours of movement for all collared animals across the research area. And what the map showed was not the dispersed and individual movement patterns she had been reading every morning for 6 years, but a convergence. 27 collared animals, 6 wolves across 2 packs, 4 mountain lions, 7 bears in pre-denning activity, and 10 elk from 3 separate herds, all moving, with varying pace and from varying distances and directions, toward a single GPS coordinate at approximately 6,200 feet elevation in the northern section of the research area. Coordinate that Celeste knew as a point on an exposed granite ridge with no water source. No mineral lick, no documented prey concentration, no food resource of any kind that she or her team had recorded in 6 years of field surveys, and no historical significance in the movement data of any of the animals now converging on it. She flagged the visualization as a possible data error and ran the raw collar transmission. records for all 27 animals. And the raw data confirmed what the visualization showed, 27 animals moving toward the same point. Some already within 2 miles, others beginning movement from distances of up to 30 miles away. And the movement patterns were not the exploratory or foraging patterns she was trained to read, but directed travel, the kind of linear, purposeful movement that GPS collar researchers called a beeline, associated with animals moving toward a known and specific destination. The movement of an animal that knows where it is going. She called her field assistant and drove to the base of the ridge. Arriving by early afternoon, she set up a spotting scope at a distance that respected the animals, space, and would not disrupt behavior she was documenting. And over the next 4 hours, she observed 9 of the 27 tagged animals arrive at the ridge. 2 wolves, a mountain lion, 3 bears, and 3 elk, arriving separately. From different directions, using different approach routes, and each arriving at the same exposed section of granite at the ridge's crest. And the behavior she observed at the point of arrival was unlike any documented convergence behavior in her 11 years of field experience and in the UHLF. In the UHL, she had spent the following week reviewing. The animals were not aggressive toward each other, not competing for a resource, not exhibiting any of the behavioral patterns associated with known interspecies attractants, but simply arriving at the point and remaining there, standing or sitting in loose proximity to animals they would, under normal conditions, treat as competitors or prey, in a shared stillness that lasted for most of the animals she observed, between 20 minutes and 2 hours before they departed individually back into the landscape. She returned to the research station and spent 3 days reviewing the data and the literature and consulting with 2 colleagues at other institutions. And no one could offer a mechanism, not a seismic precursor, not an atmospheric condition, not a documented example of interspecies convergence behavior of this. It's kind in the absence of a shared attractant, and she filed a research note in the study's internal record and wrote a preliminary observation report that she submitted to the study's principal investigator, who read it and called her and asked carefully, "Is there anything at that coordinate? Any structure? Any debris? Any human presence?" She said she had walked the site the day after the convergence and found nothing. Clean granite, lichen. The small depressions of long-time animal use that she could not date, and the principal investigator said he would bring it to the study's advisory board. And the advisory board considered it for 2 months and issued a recommendation to extend the monitoring period at the northern section and increase transmission frequency for the collared animals in that zone, which Celeste has done, and in 14 months of extended monitoring, the convergence has occurred twice more, different animals. Same coordinate, same behavioral profile at the site, and Celeste has now been to the ridge 6 times, twice during active convergence events, and 4 times between them. And the granite at the convergence point is the same granite she has walked across hundreds of times in 6 years of field work. It contains nothing she can identify. And she has added to her research notes a line she has not submitted to any publication. The animals know something is at this location. 11 years of field experience suggests their spatial knowledge of this terrain exceeds mine in every relevant dimension. I am inclined to trust what they know. Oswald Herne had been a registered polysomnographic technologist for 9 years, the last 6 working at the Westgate Sleep Disorders Center, a clinical sleep medicine facility attached to a regional hospital, running between 6 and 10 overnight study sessions per week for patients referred by physicians for evaluation of sleep apnea, parasomnias, narcolepsy, restless leg syndrome, and the full spectrum of sleep architecture disorders that the field of sleep medicine had developed. Over the preceding 40 years, precise and well-documented set of physiological tools to identify, and Oswald understood the overnight study environment with the specific and sustainable equanimity of a person who worked nights by choice and found genuine professional satisfaction in the detailed technical work of polysomnography, the electrode placement, the signal monitoring, the real-time evaluation of EEG, respiratory effort, oxygen saturation, and limb movement, the slow work of watching sleeping strangers breathe and noting with precision what their bodies were and were not doing correctly in the dark. The anomaly developed across 3 nights in a single week: Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, with 3 patients who had no connection to each other, who had been referred by different physicians for different presenting complaints, who had been assigned to the sleep center through the standard scheduling workflow, and whose study nights happened to fall in the same week by administrative coincidence, and who were, by every available demographic and clinical measure, 3 entirely unrelated people: a 63-year-old retired male postal worker referred for suspected sleep apnea, a 31-year-old female software engineer referred for evaluation of suspected REM sleep behavior disorder, and a 47-year-old male high school teacher referred following a series of episodes his wife had described as consistent with parasomnia. Oswald ran all 3 studies personally across that week. Standard practice for the center's staffing configuration, and the anomaly appeared not in the polysomnographic data, which was clinically normal across all 3 studies. And in the post-study patient interviews he conducted the following morning as part of the center's standard protocol. The brief, structured conversation in which patients described their recalled sleep experience, and all 3 patients asked, in the standard way, what they could remember from the night's sleep. Independently described the same dream, not a similar dream, not a shared theme, not a parallel narrative, but the same dream in the same sequence, with the same specific visual environment and the same specific sequence of events described in language that Oswald, who had conducted post-study interviews with hundreds of patients over 6 years, recognized immediately as not the paraphrased convergence of independent experiences, but the description of a single shared experience from 3 different observers. The dream all 3 described was this: a long hallway in an institutional building, described identically as wide, with a linoleum floor and a specific green and gray pattern, at the end of which was a door that was slightly open. And behind the door, a room they could not enter. And in the room, a sound that the retired postal worker described as a voice reading something. The software engineer described as someone reciting names from a list, and the high school teacher described as someone calling attendance. And all 3 had approached the door, and none of them had opened it. And all 3 had experienced a specific and overwhelming sense that the names being called from inside the room included theirs, and had turned and walked back down the hallway before reaching the door. And woken immediately after, Oswald documented all 3 interviews verbatim in the post-study record and spent 4 days reviewing the polysomnographic data for the 3 studies, and the EEG records showed each patient entering REM sleep during the same approximate time window between 3 and 4 a.m., which was when Oswald estimated. The shared dream sequence had occurred based on the patient's descriptions of waking, but the EEG data showed nothing anomalous. no synchronized activity. No unusual spike patterns. Nothing in the physiological record that should not have been there. He consulted with the center's medical director, who was a board-certified sleep medicine physician, and the medical director reviewed the interview records and the polysomnographic data and said the shared dream was clinically unexplained and outside the documented literature of shared or influenced sleep experiences, and asked Oswald whether the patients had had any contact with each other. Oswald confirmed they had not. Different arrival times, different departure times. Separated by a full day between studies, and the center's layout put each patient in a private room without auditory access to any other patient's room. The medical director recommended the incident be documented in the center's quality assurance record and that future multi-patient weeks be monitored for recurrence, and Oswald continued running studies through the following months without another shared dream incident until the following March, when two patients from a Wednesday and Friday study pair described in their separate morning interviews the same hallway, the same door, the same room with the same attending sound, and one of them said, specifically, that the voice inside the room had reached the point in the list where her name was about to come, and she had felt it the way you feel the air change before lightning. She had turned and run. Oswald sat with the morning interview recording for that patient for a long time before he filed it, because what the patient had described, the felt proximity of her own name being called from inside a room she could not enter, was, in the specific and private accounting of a person who had spent 9 years monitoring the sleep of strangers and had learned to take seriously what they encountered on the other side of consciousness, the most unsettling thing he had heard in his professional career, and he has not stopped thinking about it. And he has not stopped monitoring in the door in the dream, as best he can reconstruct from the combined descriptions of 4 patients who approached it without opening it, is a door he has been trying, with the specific professional patience of a man who monitors the space between waking and sleeping for a living, to understand. Britta Samuelsson had been a commissioned notary public for 16 years, operating her notarial practice as an adjunct to her primary work as an independent paralegal, serving a small community in a rural section of the upper Midwest, a practice that required from its practitioners the specific and unglamorous virtue of procedural rigor, because a notarial act was a legal authentication and the commission behind it was a public trust, and the function of a notary was not to evaluate the content of what was being signed, but to verify the identity of the signer, confirm their willingness, apply the seal with exactness, and maintain a record of every act performed. And Britta had maintained her record with the thoroughness of someone who understood that her journal was a legal document, and that the integrity of her practice depended entirely on its accuracy and completeness. The anomaly surfaced during her annual journal audit, a self-imposed review she had conducted every January since her first commission. Checking her completed journal entries against client correspondence and payment records to confirm the records were clean, and she found in the current journal a notarization she had no memory of performing. An acknowledgement for a real property deed transfer for a property at a specific rural address in her county, dated for months prior, bearing her journal entry number in the correct sequence, in handwriting that was hers in all the ways she could evaluate letter formation, ink pressure, the specific way she connected the letters in her own signature, and with a physical seal impression. She examined under her desk magnifier and confirmed as consistent with a mechanical impression of her own notary seal, which lived in the locked drawer of her home office and which she held and used personally. never delegating its use to anyone. She had no client contact record for the signing party named in the document, no payment record for a fee on that date, no calendar entry for an appointment, and when she searched her memory with the specific and deliberate attention of someone trying to recover a lost appointment, she found nothing. Not a vague recollection, not a partial memory that might belong to a busy week's accumulated blur, but a complete absence. The kind of absence that was different from forgetting and that she recognized. From 16 years of maintaining careful records, as the absence of something that had not occurred in her presence. She pulled the public record for the property at the address in the document and found that the deed transfer had been recorded with the County Register of Deeds, fully processed, legally effective. And the document on file with the Register of Deeds bore her notarial seal and her signature in the same handwriting she had found in her journal. And the transfer was legally sound and had been accepted without question by the register. Meaning that somewhere in the legal record of a property transfer in her county was a notarial act that bore her credentials, her seal, and her handwriting, in which she had not performed. She filed a disclosure with the county clerk's office and with the state notary licensing authority. And the review that followed over 6 weeks established that the document's seal impression was physically indistinguishable from impressions produced by her own seal, that the handwriting on the document was consistent with known samples of her handwriting, and that no breach of her home office or her seal storage was apparent from any evidence the investigators could gather, and the licensing authority's formal finding described the notarization as of undetermined origin and recommended that Britta add additional security to her seal storage. A recommendation she implemented immediately. Adding a combination lock to the sealed drawer, and 11 weeks after implementing the additional security, she conducted a mid-year spot check of her journal and found a second anomalous entry, a different property at a different address, a different party named in the acknowledgement, the same date format and seal impression and handwriting, no corresponding client record, no appointment, no memory. The sealed drawer and combination lock showing no evidence of tampering when she checked them immediately after the discovery. She has found 9 anomalous entries in her journal over the past 2 years, all property-related acknowledgments, all 4 addresses in the same rural section of the county. And she has filed disclosures for each one and has investigated each property in the public record and found all 9 transfers legally recorded and accepted. And she has asked the county assessor's office to pull the full transfer history for all 9 properties across the previous 5 years. And the history showed that the 9 properties had collectively changed hands 41 times in 5 years. 23 of the 41 transfers bore her notarial seal and signature, and she has performed by her own record none of them in the legal real estate activity they represent, 41 transfers. 23 notarized by what presents as her own hand has involved transaction values totaling a figure the county assessor is characterized as substantial for the parcel sizes involved. And all of it has flowed through her credentials without her knowledge, cleanly and legally, and without a single document being challenged, in what Britta sits with now. In her home office, in front of a locked drawer that something appears to have no need of opening, is the specific and vertiginous recognition that her professional identity has been used, carefully and accurately and over several years, to authenticate a pattern of property activity she cannot explain. For purposes she cannot identify, with a precision and a patience that required someone or something. To understand her handwriting and her seal and her procedural format well enough to replicate them without error across 23 separate legal documents, and to do it in a way that passed every official review, and to do it quietly, correctly, and entirely without her. Laurence Quade had been a United States postal inspector for 13 years, a federal law enforcement officer whose jurisdiction covered mail fraud, mail theft, identity-related postal crimes, the broader category of offenses that use the postal system as an instrument or a target. And he understood this work with the specific and professional competence of someone who had spent a career in it, who knew the postal system from its regulatory architecture to its operational detail, who understood how mail moved and how mail could be intercepted and diverted and falsified and used, and who had in 13 years investigated enough postal crime to have developed the practiced and useful cynicism of a person who has seen most of the ways that a trusted public system can be exploited. The case that produced the anomaly was referred to his office as a routine mail delivery complaint, a category of investigation that postal inspectors handled regularly, and that was not. At its initial presentation, anything Laurence would have characterized as unusual. A property management company in a mid-sized city had filed a complaint noting that mail addressed to tenants at several of their managed properties was not being delivered. Tenants at those properties were reporting non-receipt of expected correspondence over a period of several months. And the complaint requested investigation of potential mail theft or carrier irregularity. Laurence began with carrier route analysis, pulling the delivery records and carrier scan data for the affected addresses, and the route data showed normal delivery activity. The carriers were scanning items as delivered at the addresses in question on the expected dates, meaning the system indicated successful delivery, but the tenants were not receiving mail, which was the standard pattern of a mail theft operation and not unusual. When he began tracing the undelivered mail through the postal tracking system, he found the first anomaly. Several of the missing items had tracking numbers, and when he pulled the tracking histories, he found that the items had been delivered, scanned as delivered by the carrier at the correct address on the correct date. But the delivery scan coordinates showed delivery occurring at a geographic location that, when he plotted it on the mapping system, did not correspond to the physical address on the label. The coordinates placed the delivery at a point in a residential neighborhood approximately 3 blocks from the correct address, at a location that his mapping system showed as an unimproved lot, a parcel of land with no structure, no mailbox, no addressable location of any kind. Simply an open parcel with a recorded ownership history as a vacant piece of land, and when he drove to the coordinates, he stood on an empty lot with a chain-link fence on 2 sides and a mature oak tree in its center. There's no mailbox, no structure, no delivery receptacle of any kind. And a carrier scan history showing successful mail delivery at that location on 9 separate dates across 4 months. He pulled the delivery records for all 47 affected addresses in the complaint and found that 23 of them showed the same pattern items scanned as delivered at non-existent locations within a 325 block radius of the correct addresses, and he mapped all 23 anomalous delivery coordinates and found they clustered in a specific area of the neighborhood, all within a 4-block zone. All at locations the city's parcel map and his own field survey confirmed as vacant land or non-addressable geographic points. And the carrier who had made the deliveries confirmed that he had delivered mail to actual mailboxes at actual addresses, and that the scan coordinates were generated automatically by his delivery scanner at the moment of mailbox scan, meaning the coordinates in the system reflected where his scanner said it was when it recorded each delivery. And if the scanner said it was at a vacant lot 3 blocks from where he was standing when he scanned a mailbox, either the scanner was wrong or he was. And he said the scanner had never been wrong before, and he had been doing the route for 6 years. Laurence submitted the equipment to the Postal Service's technical division for testing. And the equipment tested within normal operational parameters, with no GPS malfunction identified, and he filed a detailed anomaly report with his supervisor, who referred it to the technical division's advanced analysis team. The advanced analysis team's report, which arrived 6 weeks later, identified the anomalous scan coordinates as genuine. GPS data, meaning the scanner's GPS receiver had genuinely located itself at the vacant lot coordinates at the moment of each scan. Not a software error, not a calibration drift, but an accurate reading of the scanner's physical location, and the report's summary noted that this finding was inconsistent with a carrier's reported location at time of delivery and was technically unresolved, and recommended recalibration of the carrier's scanner, which was replaced, and the new scanner showed no anomalous delivery coordinates for the following 2 months. Then the anomalous coordinates resumed, same zone, same vacant locations. New scanner and Laurence drove the route with the carrier for a full day and watched the scanner record each delivery. And at 2 of the 22 deliveries, the scanner's display showed him standing at the correct address. He was standing at the correct address, but the recorded coordinate in the system was the vacant lot. And he watched it happen in real time, the scanner in his hand at a mailbox on a numbered street, and the system recording a delivery 3 blocks away at a location with no mailbox and no address. And he stood there for a long time after that second delivery and looked at the scanner, and then looked at the vacant lot visible at the far end of the block, and thought about what it would mean if the scanner was correct, if something at those vacant locations was receiving the mail. That the system recorded as delivered there, and then he finished the route and filed his report and requested a transfer to a different case, which was granted, and he has not returned to that neighborhood. And the anomalous delivery coordinates are documented in a case file that remains technically open and practically unworked. And Laurence has, in the 2 years since, developed the specific and occupationally inconvenient conviction that somewhere in a 4-block radius of a residential neighborhood in a mid-sized city, there is something receiving mail at locations the city has no record of, and has been receiving it correctly and regularly for longer than the complaint period covered. Isolde Vane had been a professional paintings conservator for 18 years. The last 11 as senior conservator at a regional art museum with a collection that included a significant holding of 17th century Northern European oil paintings, a specialty she had focused on in her graduate training and had pursued with a disciplined and technical passion of someone who understood that paintings conservation was not restoration in the decorative sense, but forensic stewardship, the careful and documented management of objects that were simultaneously works of art. Historical artifacts and complex material systems slowly changing over time under the influence of light and humidity and atmospheric chemistry and the accumulated damage of handling and display across centuries. And her work was the precise and ongoing negotiation between what an object was, what it had been, and what it was becoming. And she was good at this in the way that people are good at things that require equal parts scientific precision and deep looking, because the conservator's fundamental tool was looking sustained, trained, systematic observation of an object across time, the ability to notice change at a scale that untrained eyes would not register. The painting was a 17th century Dutch oil, approximately 60 by 44 centimeters, depicting a single female figure in interior domestic space, a standing woman in dark clothing with a white linen collar, positioned 3/4 facing the picture plane with her face turned slightly away from the viewer. One hand resting on a table that occupied the painting's lower right quadrant. The composition dark and intimate in the manner of the Delft school, technically accomplished in its handling of light and fabric texture. Acquired by the museum 12 years prior from a private estate and displaying the standard. Axe-related condition issues, minor paint losses at the edges. Some discolored varnish in the shadow areas, stable crackler throughout that Isolde had assessed at acquisition and had scheduled for a phased conservation treatment that began in the painting's 3rd year at the museum. Her conservation protocol required photographic documentation at each treatment session. Standardized photography under consistent controlled lighting using the same camera position and lens settings, producing a comparative photographic record that captured the painting's condition. At each stage, and she had built a photographic archive for this painting across 9 years of treatment and monitoring. A sequence of approximately 40 images documenting the stable and well-managed progression of the object's conservation. It was in the 41st image, taken at a routine condition check in the painting's 9th year at the museum, that she noticed the change. The figure in the painting was not positioned as she had been in the previous 40 images. The previous 40 images showed the figure with her face turned slightly to the right, away from the viewer. A consistent 3/4 back positioning in which the viewer could see the left side of her face, but not her eyes. The 41st image showed the figure with her face turned perhaps 5 degrees further toward the picture plane, still not facing the viewer. Still not making eye contact, but rotated slightly. The angle of her chin changed. The visible portion of her face increased by a margin that was in the image. Unambiguous to anyone who had spent 9 years looking at this painting. Oswald spent 3 days reviewing the photographic archive before she said anything to anyone, pulling the images in chronological sequence and examining them on the calibrated display she used for technical image work. And the progression was not confined to the 41st image, but was visible. Once she was looking for it, as a slow and continuous change across the sequence, the figure's face beginning the rotation. At some point between the 12th and 15th images, advancing by increments too small to be noticed in any single session, but accumulating across 9 years to the 5 degree, shift visible in the current image. Rotation so slow and so gradual that it had proceeded entirely beneath the threshold of session to session. Observation for a person who had been looking at this painting professionally for 9 years and had not, until she placed all 41 images in sequence, seen it. She requested an independent photographic analysis from the museum's registrar and from a conservation colleague at a peer institution. And both confirmed the geometric change in the figure's orientation across the photographic sequence. And a technical analysis of the paint surface at the figure's face, examining the surface under UV fluorescence and infrared. Reflectography to determine whether any physical alteration of the paint layer had occurred, found the paint surface intact. No evidence of retouching, no evidence of overpainting. No physical modification to the original paint layer that could account for the observed change in the figure's orientation, meaning the change was not in the painting's material, but in the painting's image, the same paint, in the same physical configuration, depicting something different than it had depicted before, which is a conclusion that painting's conservation as a discipline has no framework to address, because paintings are static, material objects, and what a painting depicts is determined by its physical configuration and does not change unless the physical configuration changes. And Isolde has spent the 2 years since the 41st image in a professional state that she describes. To the few colleagues she has discussed this with, it's a crisis not of faith but of methodology. She has the photographic evidence. She has the technical analysis. She has the conservation record of an object she has monitored with precision for 9 years. And the evidence describes something her discipline's entire framework of understanding says is not possible. And what she does every morning when she arrives at the conservation studio and checks the paintings? Environmental monitoring is look, with the trained and sustained attention of 18 years of professional looking, at the figure's face to see whether it has turned further in the night, and she has found, over 2 years of daily observation, that the movement is no longer detectable at the resolution of daily comparison, which could mean it is stopped, and which could mean it is slowed to a rate her observation cannot resolve, and what she cannot determine, and what she lies awake considering, is whether the figure is still turning toward her, slowly and patiently, in the same incremental way it has been turning for 9 years, and whether the 42nd image, when she takes it, will show eyes. Declan Moorfield had been driving a school bus for 7 years, the last 5 on Route 14 for the Ashgrove Unified School District, a rural route covering approximately 22 miles of county road across a sparsely populated agricultural area, picking up between 31 and 37 students each morning depending on the season and the school year. And Declan knew the route with the intimate and habitual familiarity of someone who had driven the same roads at the same times through 5 years of seasons and weather, knew each driveway and its clearance, knew which families ran late, knew which stretches of road required extra attention in winter, and which bridges held water after rain, and knew the children on his route with the particular and an intimate fondness of a person who saw them for 20 minutes every morning and 20 minutes every afternoon and had watched them, over 5 years, grow from small, cautious children into taller versions of themselves. And he was good at his job in the straightforward and sufficient way of someone who understood that getting children to school safely was not a small thing, and treated it accordingly. The boy first appeared on the morning of the 14th of September. At the second stop on Route 14, the pull-off at the end of a gravel lane off County Road 7, stop that Declan had been making for 5 years, which served 2 families whose children he knew by name and face. And the boy was standing at the stop with the other 2 children, wearing the standard informal clothing of a rural school-age child. A backpack, sneakers, and Declan did what he always did when a new child appeared at a stop without prior notice from the district. Asked his name and the grade he was going to, and the boy said his name was Calvin, and he was going to 4th grade, and Declan made a note on the clipboard he kept for exactly this purpose and drove on, intending to inform the district dispatcher at the end of the day to confirm the addition to the manifest. At the school drop-off, the other children from that stop got off, and Declan looked in his rearview mirror, and the boy Calvin was not on the bus. He had not gotten off. Declan had been watching the mirror as he always did, but he was not in his seat, and he was not on the bus. And Declan did a full walkthrough after the drop, and found the bus empty in the normal way, with no child remaining, and he mentioned it to the school's front office, who said no new student named Calvin had enrolled, and no 4th grade class had a new student that day. And the district dispatcher checked the enrollment database and confirmed no student named. Calvin on Route 14, or in the 4th grade at Ashgrove Elementary, Declan returned to the stop at County Road 7 the following morning, and the boy was there again, the same clothing, the same backpack. Standing with the same quiet patience as the morning before, and Declan said good morning, and the boy got on and sat in the same seat, third row on the right, and Declan drove the route. And at the school drop-off, the boy was again not on the bus when Declan looked. Again, the school had no record of him. It continued for 11 school days, the boy present every morning at County Road 7, out on the bus for the drive, absent at the drop-off. Invisible to the school's enrollment record, and on the 12th day, one of the two regular children at that stop, a girl named May who had been riding Declan's bus for 4 years, got on and sat next to where Calvin always sat, and then moved to a different seat. And Declan asked her after the other children were off whether she knew the boy Calvin. And May looked at her shoes for a moment and then said, "That's the Hessler boy. He used to live on County Road 7. He died 2 years ago." Declan asked her what she meant, and May said that there had been a boy named Calvin Hessler who had lived at the end of the gravel lane, the same lane as Route 14's second stop, and who had died in an accident on the property 2 years before, and that her mother had told her about it when they moved to the area. And that May had recognized him on the first day he appeared at the stop, but had not said anything because she did not know what to say. Declan drove the route in silence that morning and spent the afternoon sitting in the district parking lot, not starting his car. And he pulled the district's enrollment records himself through the driver portal and found no Calvin Hessler enrolled in any grade at Ash Grove Elementary. And he searched the county's public obituary records online in the school parking lot and found a notice from 2 years prior for a 9-year-old boy named Calvin Hessler, who had lived on County Road 7 and whose funeral had been held at a church in the nearest town. Survived by his parents whose names were listed, and Declan sat with his phone in his hand in the parking lot for a long time before he drove home. And the following morning, he drove Route 14 and stopped at County Road 7, and the stop was empty. May and the other regular child were there, and Calvin was not. And he has not been there since. Not in the 14 months since May told Declan his name. And Declan drives the stop every morning and looks at the pull-off and the gravel lane and thinks about a 9-year-old boy who stood at his bus stop for 11 mornings and got on the bus and sat in the third seat on the right in Road 22, miles of County Road, and disappeared before the school and said nothing. And what Declan has settled on, after 14 months of not being able to settle on anything, is that Calvin Hessler was not trying to frighten anyone, and that a 9-year-old boy who died before he got to finish riding the school bus might simply have wanted for 11 more mornings to ride it. 10 stories. 10 professionals. A librarian whose return bin receives books from something that has never checked them out and reads what they say. A meteorologist who received the weather 7 days early from a station that was shut down 12 years ago. A funeral director finding goodbye notes on people who had no time to write them. A court reporter whose transcript knew what would be said before it was spoken. A wildlife biologist standing on a ridge watching wolves and bears and elk stand together in silence at a point on a map that contains nothing she can name. A sleep researcher listening to 3 strangers describe the same door. A notary whose seal appears on documents she has never held. A postal inspector tracking mail to coordinates where nothing exists. A conservator watching a painted face turn toward her across 9 years of looking. And a school bus driver who gave 11 more mornings to a boy who needed them. What connects these 10 people is not that something frightening happened to them. What connects them is that something was paying attention to their systems. their records, their routes, their work with a patience and a precision that required being there, quietly and correctly, for longer than any of them knew to look. We don't have names for what they found. We have their accounts careful, documented, told by people who spent their careers being exactly right about exactly the things their work required them to be right about, and they are telling you the truth. From true Terror Files official, take care of yourselves tonight. In whatever system you trust most, whatever record you rely on, whatever route you drive, whatever return bin you open on a Monday morning, look a little closer than you did yesterday. Good night.